ifite insanganyamatsiko nagerageza kugenekereza mu kinyarwanda, iravuga iti ijambo ntibizongere ukundi ridashyizwe mu bikorwa bigira ingaruka ku kwiyongera kw'ingengabitekerezo ya Jenoside. Nyuma y'imyaka 31 Jenoside yakorewe Abatutsi mu Rwanda ibaye, haracyagaragara abafite ingengabitekerezo ya Jenoside ndetse abayihakana ukabasanga hirya no hino bitari gusa mu Rwanda. Ese Jenoside yakorewe Abatutsi mu Rwanda yahitanye abarenga miliyoni, igasenya ibikorwa remezo, igasiga imfubyi n'abapfakazi, yaba nta somo yasigiye isi? Fiona.
Yeah, indeed. This is a global call to action, and the Kwibuka 31 conference comes to challenge leaders, it comes to challenge scholars as well as the civil society to critically address the foundation of the genocide ideology. Why and how is it really continuing? We'll be looking as well at how the global inaction has enabled it. What must we do to really stop it? Rwanda, from the past, rose from the darkest tragedy in human history. Rwanda today really stands at stability. It stands with peace, which is a testament of the resilience of the Rwandan people as well as its leadership. But peace must be safeguarded through vigilance and unwavering commitment to truth and justice.
Nibyo Fiona, iyi nama rero kandi igizwe n'ibiganiro bibiri by'ibanze. Icyambere kiragaruka ku kureba impamvu ingengabitekerezo ya Jenoside idacika. Kuva rero Jenoside yaba mu Rwanda, Jenoside yakorewe Abatutsi mu Rwanda yaba, ntabwo ingengabitekerezo yayo yarekeye mu 1994, ahubwo yakomereje mu bayihakana, abayipfobya, haba mu Rwanda no hanze yarwo. Aba bayipfobya kandi abenshi ubasanga baragize n'uruhare rukomeye muri Jenoside yakorewe Abatutsi. Ikiganiro cya kabiri kiragaruka ku buryo bwo kurwanya ubufatanye bw'abakomeje gukwirakwiza ingengabitekerezo ya Jenoside. Uruhare rw'itangazamakuru n'uruhe? Urubyiruko rwa Afurika rwakora iki? Imiryango mpuzamahanga ikwiriye
Thank you. Please take your seats. Good morning all, Madam First Lady, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, friends of Rwanda. Welcome to the 31 International Conference of Kwibuka. My name is Ariane Nkesha, and it is once again my honor to serve you as your Master of Ceremonies. We gather here in Kigali, 31 years after the genocide against the Tutsi, not just to remember, but to confront the continued presence of the danger of genocide ideology. This year's theme, One Never Again Fails, Continuation of Genocide Ideology, is a sobering reminder that remembrance must go hand in hand with responsibility and action. We open today's conference with reflections and insights from key voices, those who have walked alongside Rwanda's path to justice, peace, and vigilance. We thank you all. We encourage you to engage deeply, to listen actively, and to reflect on how each of us can respond to the call of Kwibuka, not only today, but every day. To begin our program, it is my honor to invite Honorable Dr. Jean Damascene Bizimana, Minister of National Unity and Civic Engagement, to deliver the keynote address. Thank you.
Excellence, la Première Dame, Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles, Messieurs, tout honneur respecté, good morning, bonjour, mwaramutse. Permettez-moi de prime abord de souhaiter les bienvenus à Kigali aux invités, panélistes et participants qui nous sont venus de loin, J'espère que vous avez eu un beau voyage, une agréable nuit et que vous allez avoir un beau séjour au Rwanda. Nous entamons demain la 31e commémoration du génocide perpétré contre les Tutsis au Rwanda en 1994. Cette conférence s'inscrit d'une part dans le respect de la mémoire et d'autre part dans la mise en application de la résolution de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies du 23 décembre 2003, modifiée le 26 janvier 2018, qui a consacré la date du 7 avril comme, je cite, une journée internationale de réflexion sur le génocide des Tutsis au Rwanda en 1994. Il y a une règle sur laquelle nous sommes tous d'accord. C'est que s'il n'y avait pas eu une ingérence européenne en Afrique et au Rwanda en particulier, nous ne serions pas en train de faire une conférence comme celle-ci sur un génocide ayant emporté plus d'1 million de personnes tuées pour ce qu'elles étaient. Je le dis avec conviction en me référant aux propres écrits des premiers missionnaires arrivés au Rwanda qui ont décrit une société unie et unifiée. Je cite 2 exemples. Le premier ouvrage, celui des missionnaires catholiques publié à Kigali en 1930, chanoine Louis Dorager, intitulé « Le Rwanda ancien et moderne », dans lequel il s'émerveille devant l'unité des Rwandais en ces termes, je le cite, « Les indigènes de ce pays ont bien le sentiment de ne former qu'un seul peuple, celui des Rwandais, qui a donné son nom au territoire. Ce sentiment prend la forme qu'il revêt normalement chez les sédentaires d'attachement au sol, non pas seulement au foyer, à la commune ou à la province et au territoire ancien, obéissant au même prince. Le patriotisme se traduit dans l'attachement à la dynastie régnante. » Fin de citation. Le second ouvrage, c'est un ouvrage historique bien connu, écrit par un père blanc, Albert Pagès, en 1933, intitulé « Un royaume hamite au centre de l'Afrique ». Voici ce qu'il dit à propos de l'unité des Rwandais. Les Rwandais étaient persuadés, avant la pénétration européenne, que leur pays était le centre du monde, le plus puissant et le plus civilisé de toute la terre. Il faut ajouter l'unité linguistique qui, presque absolue d'un bout à l'autre du territoire, conditionne la facilité des relations entre les habitants, l'unité des institutions de coutume et d'usage dans la vie privée, la vie sociale et la vie publique, entre concitoyens de conditions différentes et enfin l'unité religieuse. Mesdames et messieurs, une société unie de ce point, telle que les premiers Blancs l'ont trouvée, ne pouvait en aucun cas aboutir à un génocide si ces valeurs n'avaient pas été détruites par les occupants blancs pour leurs propres intérêts. En peu de mots, l'origine profonde du génocide des Tutsis se trouve dans la colonisation belge qui a détruit l'identité existentielle du Rwandais. Après, la Belgique a idéologisé des partis politiques rwandais, tels Parme Hutu et Aprosoma, qui ont poursuivi l'œuvre ravageur de la colonisation. C'est finalement l'élite rwandaise, au niveau politique, universitaire, militaire, religieuse, société civile et autres, formée dans ce système discriminatoire belge qui a pensé intellectuellement le génocide. Nous estimons que cette conférence permettra particulièrement aux jeunes de comprendre le modus operandi de ce génocide qui a été un crime soigneusement conçu, élaboré et commis au nom d'une idéologie ethniciste et politique. Le moment de cette conférence est important car nous voyons la résurgence dans notre région des mêmes idées, des mêmes idéologies et des mêmes complicités comme celles qui ont eu libre cours au Rwanda entre 1990 et 1994. Ces événements se manifestent par la falsification des faits, le détournement des responsabilités, la criminalisation des victimes et la sanctification des bourreaux. Pire encore, nous observons le négationnisme grandir en Europe, notamment en Belgique, où il se déroule impunément. En France, ce crime est réprimé sur instruction du parquet, comme on l'a vu en décembre 2024 avec la condamnation de Charles Onana pour le négationnisme du génocide des Tutsis. Une première en dehors du territoire rwandais, nous nous en félicitons profondément. De nos jours, nous observons l'apparition d'actes acceptés par des États visant le sabotage des commémorations du génocide commis contre les Tutsis. C'est le cas en Belgique, où des villes comme Bruges et Liège, qui est la plus grande ville francophone belge, interdisent les commémorations publiques du génocide des Tutsis. C'est un scandale, d'autant plus que la Belgique, quand elle diabolise le Rwanda, sous prétexte d'un conflit strictement interne qui se déroule sur le territoire congolais, avance qu'elle le fait en application du droit international. Or, l'établissement du droit du génocide des Tutsis est aussi un acquis du droit international consacré par les instances internationales habilitées. L'Assemblée générale de l'ONU en 2003, je l'ai dit au début, et le Conseil de sécurité en 2014 ont voté des résolutions consacrant l'obligation de commémoration pour tous les États membres de l'ONU. Nous voyons près du Rwanda des actes de reprise du génocide sur le même groupe ethnique Tutsi et Banyamulenge en République démocratique du Congo sur l'ordre du pouvoir. Des actes d'appel à la haine et d'incitation directe et publique à commettre le génocide sont lancés par des officiels. Ils se propagent au vu et au su du monde entier, en violation totale des dispositions de la Convention sur le génocide. Le présent colloque vient donc à point nommé pour s'y plonger et montrer que l'obligation de prévention du génocide dont se vantent certains États doit être réellement traduite dans la matérialité des faits, pas dans des discours vides. En deuxième lieu, l'importance de ce colloque réside dans le constat montrant la mansuétude que des États et organisations internationales et leurs services, comme la MONUSCO, accordent au groupe génocidaire, les FDLR. Ce groupe, constitué d'éléments coupables de génocide, est recru et ouvertement condamné par l'ONU dans différentes résolutions. Or, ce même groupe terroriste est aujourd'hui toléré et sanctifié par les mêmes instances. L'aveuglement va jusqu'à inclure les FDLR dans l'armée régulière congolaise, à côté des milices Wazalendo, rappelant les Interahamwe et Impuzamugambi de triste mémoire au Rwanda. La sympathie criminelle va jusqu'au point de tolérer l'emploi des mercenaires européens, agissant impunément sous le regard complice de la MONUSCO. Le Rwanda, dans sa transparence habituelle, les a laissés rentrer tranquillement. La presse occidentale n'a pas du tout parlé de cet événement, alors que l'usage des mercenaires est interdit par les conventions de Genève du 9 août 1949 et les protocoles additionnels du 6 juin 1977. 31 ans viennent de s'écouler sans que la même communauté internationale jadis coupable de l'abandon du Rwanda, ne dit aucun mot quant au sort des réfugiés congolais chassés de chez eux par les FDLR depuis juillet 1994. Plus de 900 000 réfugiés congolais, Tutsis, ont quitté leur pays, leur territoire, leur domicile et résident dans des camps au Rwanda, en Ouganda et dans différents pays à travers le monde. Les crimes qu'ils ont subis sont mondialement connus, mais restent impunis. Peut-on alors dire que le génocide de Tutsis a appris quelque chose à la communauté internationale? C'est une bonne question à laquelle cette conférence doit faire le débat. Pour mieux se dédouaner, certains États et organisations internationales, comme le Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU, le Parlement européen, pour ne citer que cela, ont créé un bouc émissaire qui s'appelle le Rwanda. Le leitmotiv quotidien retenu dans la presse internationale est celui-ci, mouvement rebelle M23 soutenu par le Rwanda. Rien sur les raisons pour lesquelles ce groupe existe et pour lesquelles il se bat. Or, on ne peut pas prévenir un génocide, on ne peut pas mettre fin à un conflit sans en analyser les causes et adopter des solutions propres aux vraies causes. Ces États et organisations ont aussi trouvé des raccourcis avec des mots insensés en l'espèce qui trompent les non-avertis, comme balkanisation, souveraineté, intégrité du territoire, exploitation des minerais, et j'en passe. Ces États feignent d'ignorer que le respect intégral du droit international se trouve dans le respect de toutes les souverainetés nationales, pas seulement uniquement celle de la République démocratique du Congo. Le respect du droit international se trouve aussi dans la neutralisation des FDLR et dans la recherche des solutions définitives permettant au Rwanda d'obtenir le respect de son territoire et aux réfugiés congolais de retrouver pacifiquement et durablement le sol de leurs ancêtres. Voilà une simple analyse que des États ne font pas ou refusent sciemment de faire, mais qui s'impose. Allant vers la fin de mon allocution, qu'il me soit permis de rappeler qu'à la fin du génocide des Tutsis, en juillet 1994, nous avions vu naître l'espoir de plusieurs décisions internationales courageuses qui faisaient rêver un lendemain meilleur. Il y a eu d'abord la création du tribunal pénal international pour le Rwanda par la résolution 955 du Conseil de sécurité le 8 novembre 1994. Malgré des erreurs et manquements de ce tribunal, nous sommes d'avis qu'il a accompli un travail historique de taille par l'établissement judiciaire de l'évidence du génocide commis contre les Tutsis. En 1999, l'Organisation des Nations Unies a mis en place une commission dirigée par Ingvar Carlsson, ancien Premier ministre de Suède, qui a rendu son rapport le 15 décembre 1999, reconnaissant des manquements graves de l'ONU dans la prévention du génocide des Tutsis. Voici un extrait de ses conclusions. C'est sur le système des Nations Unies tout entier que retombe la responsabilité de n'avoir su ni prévenir ni mettre fin au génocide au Rwanda. La carence première a consisté à ne pas mobiliser les ressources et l'engagement politique qu'appelaient les événements du Rwanda et la présence des Nations Unies dans le pays. Les États membres ont persisté à ne pas témoigner de la volonté politique voulue et à se refuser d'agir de façon suffisamment résolue. Fin de citation. L'Union européenne, l'Union africaine a également créé une commission le 21 novembre 1997, présidée par l'ancien président du Botswana, Sa Ketumire Masire, laquelle a produit en mai 2000 un rapport portant un titre éloquent, je cite, « un génocide qu'on aurait pu éviter. Je cite le constat. La vérité qui émerge de notre enquête est indiscutablement que le génocide qui advint au Rwanda aurait pu être évité par ceux de la communauté internationale qui étaient en position et avaient les moyens de le faire. Mais la volonté a fait défaut et non pas les moyens. Le monde a abandonné le Rwanda. Fin de citation. Le 7 avril 2000, tout le monde s'en souvient, nous avions cru à l'ouverture d'une nouvelle page de reconnaissance et de responsabilité lorsque le Premier ministre belge Guy Verhofstadt, au stade Amahoro, prononçait sa demande de pardon en ces termes. Un dramatique cortège de négligence, d'insouciance, d'incompétence, d'hésitation et d'erreur a créé les conditions d'une tragédie sans nom. Et donc j'assume ici devant vous la responsabilité de mon pays, des autorités militaires et politiques belges. Et au nom de mon pays, au nom de mon pays, au nom de mon peuple, je vous demande pardon pour cela. Fin de citation. Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles et Messieurs, malgré ces différents aveux de reconnaissance, de responsabilité, nous observons aujourd'hui une renaissance des mêmes fautes que celles pour lesquelles les États avaient demandé pardon. Nous observons une certaine complicité internationale flagrante et un refus troublant de prévention d'un génocide en cours en République démocratique du Congo. C'est comme si les leçons que le monde avait tirées du génocide des Tutsis n'ont plus de raison d'être. Nous ne pouvons pas observer la renaissance d'une idéologie récurrente de banalisation du mal et entrer dans la période de commémoration du génocide des Tutsis, le dernier du XXe siècle, sans nous interroger sur les mobiles de son existence et les voies et moyens de le combattre et de le vaincre, en regardant le passé, le présent et le futur. Je vous souhaite des travaux fructueux au long de cette conférence. Merci.
Merci, honorable ministre, pour ces mots qui appellent à l'action et à la conscience. We are now going to move to our first panel of the day, titled Sounding the Alarm, the Persistence of Genocide Ideology. The ideology that led to the genocide against the Tutsi did not vanish in 1994, as Honorable Minister just had reminded us. It has simply changed form through denial, distortion, recruitment, and persecution. This panel will examine how genocide ideology continues to spread, especially in our region, and explore strategies to confront it and dismantle it. I will now call our moderator for this session, Dr. Doris Picard, CEO of the Rwanda Governance Board. Joining her are our esteemed panelists, Dr. Alice Nderitu, former UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Florida Kabasinga, founder and managing partner of Sartolo and former ICTR prosecutor, Dr. Jean-Paul Kimonyo, author and leading voice on Rwanda's post-genocide transformation, and Dr. Alice Mvuka Tung, researcher and analyst on the Great Lakes region. Thank you, and I now hand over to Dr. Doris Picard.
Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam First Lady, very glad to be with you today. All protocols observed. And I would like to welcome you to this critical panel where we discuss this critical panel discussion on sounding the alarm, the persistence of genocide denial and genocide ideology. 31 years after the genocide against the Tutsi, we are confronted with the hard truth that never again remains an unfulfilled promise. Genocide ideology has not disappeared. In fact, it has merely evolved, relocated to new geographical locations beyond Rwanda's borders, and it has adapted to the new mediums that are available and continues to manifest through denial, distortion, incitement, and targeted persecution, especially in places like Eastern DRC. Today's conversation is both urgent and necessary. We explore how this ideology survives, what enables it, and most importantly, what must be done to address this. I'm honored to be joined by four remarkable individuals whose work has directly engaged with the fight against genocide and its ideological roots. First, we have Madam Alice Hwairi Munderitu, a respected mediator, author, former United Nations special advisor on the prevention of genocide, and she serves as current global president of Isoko Center for Humanity at Aegis Trust. She has worked extensively across Africa in conflict resolution, genocide prevention, and inclusive peace building, often leading dialogue processes in deeply divided societies. We also have right next to her, Madame Florida Kabasinga, distinguished lawyer, justice advocate, founder and managing partner of Certa Law, a leading litigation advisory firm based in Kigali. She has previously served as prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, where she played a critical role in advancing accountability for the genocide against the Tutsi. With her expertise in international criminal justice and human rights, she's been a leading voice in the fight against genocide ideology, legal denialism, and impunity. Her work currently continues to advance survivor-centered justice and uphold the truth of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Right next to her, we have Dr. Jean-Paul Kimonyo, a political analyst and author known for his groundbreaking research on the genocide against the Tutsis and the Rwanda's post-genocide transformation. His works include Rwanda's Popular Genocide and Transforming Rwanda. And it offers a deep insight into the historical roots of genocide ideology and the challenges encountered in national reconstruction. He is a leading voice in how societies can confront violent pasts while building inclusive and resilient futures. Finally, last but certainly not least, Dr. Alex Mvukantung, leading researcher and analyst specializing in the Great Lakes region of Africa with a focus on conflict, identity, and the persistence of genocide ideology. Born in the DRC, Dr. Ntung brings both personal experience and scholarly insight to his work on regional instability, cross-border violence, and the targeting of Tutsi communities in Eastern DRC. He's widely recognized for his critical analysis of international inaction and his advocacy for truth, justice, and long-term peace building. So thank you very much, esteemed panelists, for taking the time to be with us today. I think we'll start with a discussion, just going back to the roots of it all, of this genocide ideology when it was first confronted, especially with Ms. Florida, who worked as I mentioned, who worked as a prosecutor at the ICTR. And I would like to just ask of her, from this experience, what patterns did you observe, or rhetorics and strategies used by genocide perpetrators in their defense at the ICTR, or even surrounding their prosecution? How do you see these strategies repeated, these patterns replicated and adopted? How do you see these parallel being drawn today?
First of all, at the ICTR, we had the biggest ideologues of genocide. We had the people who planned the genocide, and therefore the people behind what we see today, the rhetoric that comes out in denial, came first from the defense of the ICTR, from what the key ideologues were actually using to defend their actions in 1994. So when you see the arguments that are used today by ideologues, you actually realize a lot of those were the defenses that were used at the ICTR. The first one is about the plane crash. That is usually the biggest defense. And how it was used at the ICTR is that they are not responsible for the genocide, because on the 6th of April, there was a plane crash where the father of the nation was killed by the RPF. And therefore, what followed was spontaneous. It was people rising up and doing things. It was not planned, and therefore they are not responsible for the genocide. So when people talk about the plane crash, in fact, it's a way of shifting blame, but it does not explain the fact that the moment the plane crash happened, you see something that has been planned for a long time. There is no explanation for the Interahamwe having been trained, for the Impuzamugambi having been trained as militias, for the lists of Tutsi victims that had been prepared. It does not explain how the genocide immediately was put into action. Immediately, you see roadblocks going up. You see key Tutsi figures being killed first, and then later on, you see cabinet members being sent from the central government to go out into various parts of Rwanda to actually oversee the genocide. So today, the ideologues, when they start talking about plane crash, they are literally trying to confuse everybody. The theory of double genocide, that started at the ICTR. So you create a moral equivalence, and yet we know that the only recognized genocide of what happened in this country that is both legal and factual is the genocide of the Tutsi. And you find some people actually talking about in subtle ways that are nuanced, but it was not only the Tutsi who died. So while factually true, there are moderate Hutus who died, the reality is genocide has a specific definition. And when you look at it, it's a specific group of people, either ethnic, national, religious. So those are the people that are supposed to be, they are protected. And so what has been recognized is the Tutsi genocide. So when you say, but other people died, what are you trying to do? You're trying to say, since everybody died, there is no genocide against the Tutsi. And that started at the ICTR. When people use language of Rwandan genocide, it's not by accident. And ideologues, to be quite honest, they're very smart people. So when they say Rwandan genocide, that means Rwandans were targeted to be annihilated in 1994, which is not true. And so we must call that out. And that started also with the people at the ICTR. There's something that happens when they say shift the blame. When you're accused of genocide, go on the offensive and try the current government. And that is happening even when we are trying to get perpetrators extradited from different countries. They don't defend themselves for the most part. What they do is try to make it about the current government. They are murderers. You don't know who these people are. And it happens all the time. So those are the subtle ways of how these things are done, and they must be called out. The most important thing to understand is that genocides start through ideology. That's how it begins. Prior to 1994, if the government in this country had actually stopped the ideology and not promoted it, we would not have had 1994. So to be very clear, it is not a matter that is to be taken lightly. So when ideology is accepted and taken lightly, and you are told it's not as serious as it sounds, to be honest, that is not true. We have seen in this country what ideology can lead to. So those are the nuanced ways that people must be aware and look out for, that started with the key ideologues, but are continuing today with people in different parts of the world, and it must be called out whenever it happens.
Thank you very much, Madam Kausinga. And I just want to come to Madam Wairimu a bit, and then just draw these two stark portraits. When Florida mentioned that, you know, the international, when she mentioned the preparation that went behind the genocide, you know, as a counter to the narrative of a spontaneous genocide. At the same time, with the international community, we see that there were alarms sounded almost daily, right? And I want to contrast that with the picture of, I think you've all, to some extent, been to the memorial, the Gisozi Genocide Memorial. When you got into the area of the children, which is actually the most heartbreaking area, when they're talking about the children, there's that one child that tells their mother, don't worry, UNAMIR is going to rescue us. So on one hand, we have the international community that knows, has been warned repeatedly that a genocide is in place, is being prepared. Genocide ideology has taken root. On the other, there is this trust in Rwanda that international systems, international human rights systems will offer some level of protection. So to you, Ms. Wairimu, you've worked at a global level to prevent atrocities, but yet we see them keep being repeated at an alarming rate. Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda against the Tutsis was not the last genocide that we've experienced. What are the key failures or gaps you've observed in how international systems detect and respond to persistent genocide ideology? And how do you see a way to address these failings? Because at some point it just seems very endemic and intractable. What can be changed?
Thank you very much. And here we are commemorating the 31st, when we remember the genocide against the Tutsi. And it brings my mind to times at which the international community said never again. And we know that after the Second World War, how horrified everybody was, especially when the horrors of the Holocaust began to come out. And that led to the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And the whole world saying, no, this can never happen again. And an outpouring of support for those efforts, with Ethiopia being the first country to ratify the Genocide Convention, with lots of legislation coming up in Latin America. And then we fast forward to the 1994, a genocide happened in this country against the Tutsi. A genocide happened in Srebrenica against the Bosniak Muslims. And again, we came to another never again moment where international mobilization in terms of what do we do to ensure that this never happens again. And I remember, because the genocide against the Tutsi, it's a genocide that happened in living memory. I personally had already graduated from the University of Nairobi, and I remember vividly what was happening at that time and how it had been made very clear through early warning signs, especially by newspapers, journalists. They were writing, the Tutsis are being killed, the Tutsis are being targeted. So even those of us who didn't have information that the international organizations had at that time, that we knew that there was a genocide, there was something, there was massive mass killing. We didn't have the word genocide then, but we knew there was mass killing against the Tutsi. So the African Union put together legal frameworks in this never again moment to ensure that another genocide like happened against the Tutsi did not happen. put in place the ICGLR protocol with all these frameworks. The countries in the Great Lakes region are all supposed to have prevention of genocide committees that speak to ensuring that a genocide that happened against the Tutsi doesn't happen again. Europe has all these frameworks. The EU has frameworks. Many countries in Europe that already had Holocaust laws in terms of denying the Holocaust expanded them to speak to genocide prevention as well. But we are at a moment when we ask ourselves, so how good are these laws? How good are these legislative frameworks? When we can't speak to specific facts. And one specific fact being, and I'm glad that Florida worked at the ICTR, because one of the things that the ICTR did was indict more than 1,000 people. I don't remember the actual number. What I know is that more than 1,000 people are still living free. People indicted for the genocide against the Tutsi here in Rwanda. And that 500 of them, over 500 of them, 530 of them are living in the DRC. And if these people are living in the DRC, indicted by a UN tribunal, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and they are living free, what then does never again mean? Why aren't we all mobilized and trying to establish where those people are and trying to pressure the governments that are protecting them so that those people face trial? Why does the international community needs to ask itself, like, you cannot condone living next to a bicycle thief, but you can condone living next to somebody who planned and implemented the killing of millions of people or thousands of people. So there is actually a failure in terms of implementation and in terms of what really needs to be done. So in terms of genocide ideology, we do know for a fact, those of us who worked in this field, that people who have been targeted for genocide before are 3 times higher at risk to be targeted again, which is why you see this genocide ideology going on and on, which is why we see that that when the people who are being killed in DRC, you've seen the videos of people being burnt and eaten alive. So when a Congolese Tutsi says that they are being killed in the DRC, then you see the role of genocide ideology in that they blame the victim instead of blaming the people who are killing. We don't ask ourselves as an international community, do we actually think those 500, more than 500 indicted people went to the DRC and just sat there? Do we think that when they went there and found the Congolese Tutsi there, that they thought that now they'll start coexisting with them? Why do we not understand, why do we not address the root causes and these are failure of the international community of the fact of the existence of the FDLR? Why is there consistent overplaying, including international media, underplaying the role of the FDLR and saying the FDLR is not as powerful as it used to be? Why is it not powerful when it has an ideology and it has more than 500 people indicted by the ICTR who know how to actually execute a genocide and who are now living in that space? So in terms of frameworks, there's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of political will. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of knowledge, actual knowledge of genocide ideology. How many countries in the world are actually teaching genocide ideology? How many each time when in my previous position, when I used to talk about risk factors for genocide, even to people who work within the international system, I would be surprised by how little people know. If you ask somebody, what are the risk factors for genocide in any specific space? What needs to be present for a genocide to happen? You'll be surprised how many little people know about that. So we may have laws, we may have frameworks, we may have policies, but in terms of implementation, we must ask the hard questions. And we must be prepared to ask hard questions of governments. We must be prepared to say that a life in Africa or a life in any other part of the world is as important as a life, for example, in Europe. We need to ensure that the international frameworks, the international human rights institutions speak to those specific lives as if one person, for example, had been killed, say, in Paris today. We need to speak to that particular aspect. So education still continues to be huge. It continues to be something that needs to be done, but what kind of education? And also we must stop framing never again as something episodic. You know, it comes and goes. Then we wait for the next genocide. Then we are all running around and setting up tribunals and saying, no, this will never happen again. And then it happens again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for even this emphasis on implementation. We have all the legal frameworks available to prevent, and I've seen your former office had also developed sort of an alarm system, you know, key identifiers that genocidal ideology is being implemented in certain countries. And it comes back also to what Florida was talking about, the defenses that were being used at the ICTR forming part of the genocide ideology that we see today. And I'd like to just come to Dr. Kimonyo on this aspect where, yes, we have this genocide ideology, right? Yes, we have these international, but these are enabled by systems that are in place, either national, regional, international. And you've worked on, you've had this research in Rwanda's history, and you have a very deep understanding of the societal and structural conditions that allowed the genocide ideology to flourish before 1994. What warning signs do you see repeated in these conditions? And I wouldn't want you to limit yourself to just the conditions within Rwanda, but even within the international community. What do you see repeated today that is enabling this continued persecution of Tutsis in the region?
Thank you very much, Doris. First, I would like to maybe say that the ideology of genocide before '94 was not flourishing in Rwanda society as such. I think that we have a kind of distorted perspective because of what happened and finally happened at the end of the process. We have the impression that this intense mobilization of the population was there for a very long time. That's not true. Before '94, the population itself was not that much in that ideology. One of the maybe most important example or proof of that, when the genocide started on the 7th of April, in many communities, Hutu and Tutsis went together and tried to fight off the Interahamwe, because at the time, what was most important was the war between political parties. And those who engineered or initiated the genocide had to make, they had a meeting here on the 11th of April to clarify the situation and send people all over the country to tell them this is not the war between parties, this is the war against Tutsis. That's one thing. Second, the ideology of genocide was dormant in certain ways, but also very present in Rwandan society, but in very specific pockets. The first one, especially after 1990, with the
second and final panel of the day, titled Changing the Narrative, Confronting Complicity. Preventing genocide ideology requires more than condemnation, as we just heard. It requires dismantling the systems, the narratives, and silence that allow it to fester. This panel will explore the role of media, youth, global institutions, and African leadership in refusing to normalize hate, and instead building a future rooted in justice and dignity. Our moderator for this session is Eugene Anangwe. Please come forward. He's a media personality that you all know and a great host. He will be joined by Dr. Donald Kaberuka, former president of the African Development Bank, among others. Professor Kingsley Mugalu, president of the African School of Governance. Madam Eba Kalondo, former spokesperson of the African Union Commission. And Ambassador Peter Fahrenholtz, former German ambassador to Rwanda from 2012 to 2016. Welcome. Over to you, Eugene.
All right. Thank you. I would like to start this conversation with a clarion call to all of us that we pay maximum attention for us to be able to pick as much as we can. It's going to be an interactive session, and we'll have a session where we'll have questions from the floor. And I believe that it's a discussion that is long overdue, and it's good that we're having it now. Now, I'd like to start off by looking, first of all, at the aspect of international complicity and silence, because this is one of the enablers of the wrong narrative that we continue to see, and also the aspect of complicity. And maybe I'll be able to start, first of all, with Professor Kingsley. This I would love to hear from you, first of all, looking at the aspect of what was said by the world, and we had it also in the previous panel, and the world did say never again in 1994. 31 years later, the genocide ideology is continuing to spread, and also most of the times with silence or sometimes indifference from global powers. What does this enduring inaction reveal about the sincerity of the international commitment to human rights, and how do we dismantle this global complicity that is somehow intentional on this issue?
Thank you very much, Anangwe. Let me begin with a personal story, if you don't mind. When the genocide happened, the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda occurred in 1994. I was a young political affairs officer on the Rwanda desk of the UN headquarters, the UN Secretariat headquarters, the Department of Peacekeeping Operations in New York. I was desk officer for Angola, for Somalia, and Rwanda. And we were so frustrated at the resistance, even to calling what was going on genocide. Why did this happen? And, you know, many people blame the Secretariat of the UN, but the Secretariat is a servant of the member states. And at that time, the most powerful member state, which was the United States, did not want to intervene. They did not want the UN to intervene, and they stopped the UN from intervening in a muscular way. We had UNAMER, but, you know, there were a few countries that had the courage, of which my country, Nigeria, was one of them, in the Security Council to call, you know, a spade and say what was going on was genocide. Nigeria stood up to do so. Karel Kovanda of Czech Republic, I believe, and Keaton of Australia. It's a long time ago, but I remember these three. So the first thing we have to understand is that the interests of powerful states are primary in their calculations, despite genuflections to human rights and certain principles in international affairs, but national self-interest. And at that time, after what happened in Somalia, where the Americans, were killed, and America just didn't want to intervene again, in Africa. So the first thing is that national interest is what drives the international response. And we see it even now. Now, after that happened, of course, everybody rallied around for the creation of the International Tribunal, which was a secondary response. Having failed to stop or intervene in the genocide, nobody had any objection to those who were the masterminds being called to account. And so later on, I moved to Arusha, to the International Tribunal. I was a legal advisor and the spokesperson for the International Tribunal. And we received a lot of support, including from the United States, to bring to account the high-ranking architects of the genocide. Yeah. I remember the trial of Bagosora Theonest, who was, by all accounts, the leading conspirator of the genocide. I remember the trial of Jean Kambanda. We remember the trial of Akayesu, the mayor, and so on and so forth. And now we see the same thing playing out in the conflict in the neighboring state. What is happening is that, again, interests, this time I would say commercial interests, are driving the response or the non-response. And so everybody's looking at, what profits they can make, and for that purpose, they create a very convenient narrative that is one-sided and fails to address the real underlying causes of what is going on. And by so doing, this attitude is complicity in genocide, in effect, because you have the same spirit, the same ideology operating against certain minorities, but there is no real strong action to make that the centerpiece of the whole discussion. Instead, some secondary narrative is created, and in a silent conspiracy, the global media runs with that narrative. So what this tells me to conclude is this, that African countries owe a responsibility to themselves first and foremost. Govern your countries inclusively. Don't wait for disaster to strike in the hope that some international community, quote unquote, is coming to save you, because their conscience is very selective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for raising that. And I know we will have some time to speak about the power of media and, of course, governance as a tool of prevention. Allow me to cross over to Ambassador Peter, because I know for a fact you've been in the diplomatic scene for